Welcome to the Tile the World podcast.
Great to be here.
Ever walk onto a job site where your perfectly laid tile suddenly looks, well, kind of off?
Oh, yeah.
Like every tiny variation is just screaming for attention.
Happens more than you'd think.
Today, we're diving deep into the sneaky culprit behind this. Critical lighting.
That's right. That specific lighting that can just ruin your day.
Think of this as your essential guide. Understanding why certain light can betray even your best work.
And more importantly, what you, as a stone and tile pro, can actually do about it.
Exactly. Because it's a scenario we've all either experienced or, heard horror stories about.
Yeah, that moment when what looked absolutely flawless suddenly appears, well, flawed under that specific light.
And that can be a really tough conversation with a client, right?
Definitely. So let's try and illuminate this issue, shall we?
Okay, let's unpack this whole idea of critical lighting then. We get that it's bad, but what's the technical breakdown? What kind of light are we really talking about here?
Okay, so imagine light skimming across a surface instead of hitting it, head on.
Right.
That's critical lighting in a nutshell. Technically, it's any light source hitting your tile work at a really low, almost parallel angle.
Parallel, okay.
Yeah. So instead of a broad, sort of diffused light, it's a focus beam. And that exaggerates every tiny little undulation.
So in practical terms, like on our projects, where do we usually bump into this kind of light?
Well, you see it frequently with wall wash lighting. Those fixtures placed close to the wall.
Near the ceiling often?
Yeah, often near the ceiling, designed to wash the surface with light. Graze lighting is even more direct.
Graze?
Yeah, where the fixture is practically touching the wall. That's really intense.
Wow.
And cove lighting, too, tucked into those architectural recesses, that can also cast this kind of revealing light.
Okay, makes sense.
The NTCA reference manual, Architessa, they both point these out as common culprits. And don't forget exterior lighting, even direct sunlight. That can create the same critical effect, Our sources mention that too.
Right, so these really shallow angles of light are the main problem here.
Ugh.
But why do they turn what looks like a perfect tile job into this, I don't know, landscape of shadows?
Well, think of it like this. That low angle, it acts like a raking light across, say, a textured painting.
Okay.
So even the slightest variation in the tile surface, maybe just normal, totally acceptable inconsistencies in manufacturing, or those minuscule imperfections from the installation itself,
Yeah.
casts a long, sharp shadow. Sal de Blasi, the Tile of the World guys, they've emphasized how critical lighting basically acts like a magnifying glass for these really minor deviations.
So it makes tiny things look huge.
Exactly. A perfectly acceptable install, well within standards, can suddenly look really suspect.
It's like the lighting becomes the ultimate QC inspector in a really harsh one.
Totally.
I can just picture a homeowner's eye being drawn straight to every little shadow, and they instantly assume the worst about the workmanship.
Precisely. And homeowners who aren't familiar with these lighting effects, they might wrongly point the finger right at you, the installer.
Yeah, I bet.
We've got examples of this. Architessa mentioned a public park bathroom, right, where overhead lights created these shadows, led to complaints, even though the install was actually done properly. Or think about that Penn Station curved tile wall example.
Right, you mentioned that.
Same tile, same install method, but one section, under distant lighting, looked fine. The other section, with close wall wash lighting, appeared flawed.
Just because of the light.
Just the light. It's a perfect real-world side-by-side. And those demos, remember the one at Coverings? They visually just slam home how drastically different the same tile can look under frontal versus wall wash lighting.
Man, it's frustrating. Because, we pour our skill and effort into these jobs, we meet all the standards, and then the lighting can just completely undermine the perception of quality.
It really can.
So what are the fundamental reasons why this low-angle light is so unforgiving? It's not just the light itself, is it? What underlying issues does it actually expose?
You're spot on. The light just reveals what's, already there. The root of the problem often lies in a few key areas. First up, probably the biggest one, substrate flatness.
Ah, okay. The surface underneath.
Exactly. Industry standards like ANSI A108, they specify a required level of flatness, like, say, a 1/4 inch tolerance over 10 feet, right?
1/4 inch, 10 feet.
If that underlying surface could be drywall, plaster, concrete, backer board, whatever, if it isn't within those tolerances, critical lighting will amplify every little high and low spot.
Like ripples on water.
Yeah, good analogy. Imagine trying to lay something perfectly flat on a bumpy hill. It's just not going to happen perfectly.
That makes perfect sense. If the base isn't level, the tiles on top are going to inherit those undulations, however slight.
Hmm.
And those are what cast the shadows under that critical light.
Exactly. And, as coverings highlighted, even something seemingly small, like not properly dampening the substrate before you put the thin set down,
Really?
yeah, that can affect the hydration, the bond, and ultimately contribute to subtle unevenness. So using that 10-foot straight edge to check for flatness.
Which coverings and tile the world both stress.
Right. It's not just a suggestion. It's like a fundamental step. You got to do it.
Because if you don't,
Well, the saying goes, and it's a crucial one for every pro to remember, you own it if you tile on an unflat substrate.
oof, yeah.
Coverings, Architecta, they emphasize that. And it's not even a set it and forget it thing either. Concrete, for example, as Coverings Connected noted, can actually curl a bit after you do that initial flatness check.
Wow, really? So even if we check at the start, things can kind of shift later on.
Potentially, yeah. With concrete especially.
Okay, so substrate is huge. What about the tiles themselves? Are they always these perfectly uniform flat pieces we kind of hope for?
Unfortunately, no, not always. Tile manufacturing has its own standards, right? ANSI A137.1.
And that defines acceptable warpage, basically, how flat a tile is allowed to be, and wedging, which is how square it is. Our sources mention this.
So there are tolerances for the tile itself.
Exactly. But even tiles that meet these standards can still have slight inherent warpage. It's just part of the manufacturing process for ceramics.
Okay.
The NTCA reference manual talks about facial dimension irregularities, fancy term for those tiny deviations from perfect flatness and squareness.
Right.
And these directly contribute to lippage.
Lippage being the height difference between tiles.
Yeah, that little edge you might feel or see under critical light, that difference between adjacent tiles that critical light just loves to highlight. Now, rectified tiles, the ones with those precisely cut edges, they can help minimize this effect.
Because the edges are so sharp.
Well, more because they tend to be flatter overall, but
Right.
yeah, but they're not like a magic bullet. Warpage can still be present. Gotcha. So the substrate can be uneven, and the tiles themselves can have these tiny imperfections, even within spec. How does something like the width of the grout joint play into this whole lighting drama?
The grout joint width. It's surprisingly significant, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Narrow grout joints, they tend to intensify those shadows under critical lighting. Tile the World, Coverings Connected, they both point this out.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. There's less space visually to absorb any slight height differences between the tiles. It makes the transition sharper.
Okay.
Wider joints, on the other hand, can act as more of a visual buffer. They help soften that effect and accommodate some of those natural variations in tile size and warpage.
So breaks up the shadow line.
Kinda, yeah. Coverings Connected actually advises that for tiles with noticeable facial dimension variations, you should really consider opening up that grout joint. They even suggest aiming for a width maybe 3 times the variation.
3 times. Wow.
Yeah. And there are also minimum recommended grout joint widths, especially for large format tiles and rectified tiles, like typically 18-inch for rectified tiles over 15 inches, and maybe 316 for calibrated tiles over 15 inches. Coverings Connected details those.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. A wider grout line can almost create a little visual breathing room, you know?
Yes, yeah.
Minimize those sharp shadow lines.
Exactly. Breathing room is a good way to put it.
What about the skill and experience of the installer? I mean, surely that's a major factor in all this.
Oh, absolutely. Huge factor. Proper installation techniques are paramount.
Like what specifically?
Well, for instance, fully collapsing the mortar ridges when you set the tile. Coverings 2019 highlighted this. It's crucial for minimizing lippage and ensuring complete support under each tile.
Because voids underneath could cause issues.
Exactly. Any voids under there can create their own little shadows or allow for slight movement. And experienced installers, they develop an eye for this stuff. They understand the critical importance of that substrate flatness, material compatibility.
Making sure the thin set, tiles, substrate all work together.
Right. It's all going to be a good match for the conditions.
And I've also heard, maybe you can confirm, that the actual pattern you lay the tile in can amplify these lighting effects too.
Oh, yeah. That's a really key point to understand, especially when you're working with larger format
The
tiles.
big ones, yeah.
Certain patterns, most notably the 50% offset, a classic running bond or brick pattern,
Sure.
that tends to really accentuate any inherent warpage and lippage, especially right at those staggered grout intersections where the corner of one tile meets the middle of another.
Because the highest point of the warp tile is often in the middle?
Precisely. So you
No.
get a very visible step right there. That's why it's generally not recommended for large format tiles. Coverings 2019, our notes, Tile the World, they all agree on this point.
So what's the recommendation then?
A maximum offset of 33% is typically recommended for tiles 15 inches or longer.
1/3 offset.
Yeah. This helps to distribute any slight warpage more gradually, makes it less noticeable, and minimizes that obvious lippage.
Okay, so with those bigger tiles, we should probably steer clear of that classic 50/50 brick look. Got it.
Generally, yeah. It's much safer.
And finally, bringing it sort of full circle here, the placement of the lights themselves, the very thing that triggers this whole discussion.
Exactly. This is where the critical lighting really hits home. Lights mounted very close to the wall, or sometimes even touching the wall.
Like that graze lighting you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. As Sal de Blasi and Coverings Connected pointed out, those cast incredibly sharp, really unforgiving shadows.
But is there anything you can do about the light placement itself?
Well, yeah. And here's the good news. Often a simple adjustment can make a huge difference.
Oh,
Moving those lights just 18 to 24 inches away from the wall.
that's it. 1.5 feet, 2 feet.
That's often enough. It's a point emphasized by Sal, Tile the World, Coverings Connected, our notes. It can dramatically reduce these shadows. It washes the wall with light at a much less severe, much more forgiving angle.
Okay, so we've got a really solid understanding now of the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the various factors that kind of contribute to it: substrate, tile, grout, pattern, light placement.
Mm-hmm. It's a combination, usually.
Yeah. For the crucial part, as pros, what proactive steps can we actually take to address this issue before it causes those headaches and potentially unhappy clients? Let's start right at the beginning, like during the design phase of a project. How can we get ahead of critical lighting then?
Okay, yeah. This is where your early involvement and, honestly, your communication skills are absolutely paramount.
Talking to the designers, architects.
Exactly. During that design phase, you need to meticulously review those lighting plans. Pay particular attention to any specs for wall wash or graze lighting. Tile the World, Coverings Connected, they both underscore this.
So spot it on the plans early.
Yes. And don't be afraid to proactively communicate with the owners, the architects, the designers about the potential impact of this type of lighting on the finished tile install.
Give them a heads up.
Definitely. Discussing options for light placement specifically, that really important move away from the wall needs to happen at this stage. Coverings 2019, Tile the World, our notes all highlight this.
Before the fixtures are ordered and installed.
Ideally, yes. And perhaps most importantly, you need to set realistic expectations with everyone involved about how the tile will look under the specified lighting. It's about education, like Tile the World emphasizes.
So getting in on those lighting conversations early, educating everybody, setting realistic expectations, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
What about once we move into the pre-installation phase? What should our focus be then to combat potential critical lighting issues?
All right, pre-installation. This is all about thorough prep and verification, the absolute first step. Meticulously inspect that substrate for flatness using a 10-foot straight edge.
There's that straight edge again.
Can't stress it enough. Coverings 2019, Tile the World, Coverings Connected, they all hammer this home. Any areas that fall outside the acceptable tolerances, they must be addressed and rectified before you even think about setting the first tile.
Fix it first. Don't tile over it.
Fix it first. If at all possible, and this is a big one, request that the permanent lighting be installed before you begin tiling.
Oh, interesting. So you can see the effect as you work.
Exactly. As Sal de Blasi and Coverings Connected suggest, this lets you actually see how the light will interact with the surface as you work. Huge advantage.
Yeah, I can see that.
Another really invaluable step, recommended by Coverings Connected, is to create a mock-up.
Like a sample board?
Sort of, but ideally on-site. A small sample area with the specified tile, and crucially, under the actual lighting conditions if possible. Get approval from all the stakeholders, owner, designer, GC.
Yeah, sign off on the look.
Yeah. That visual confirmation can prevent a lot of headaches down the road. And finally, and this is a really critical step in protecting yourself,
What's that?
consider submitting a formal cautionary letter.
A letter? To who?
To the architect, the GC, the owner, outlining your concerns about the specified critical lighting and its potential effects on the finished tile work.
Documenting your concerns up front.
Exactly. The NTCA reference manual even provides a sample letter you can adapt for this, as we noted. Getting those concerns documented is just crucial, CYA.
That cautionary letter sounds like an incredibly smart move. Documenting potential issues up front. Okay, so now we're on the job site. Materials are there. We're in the thick of the installation itself. Are there specific techniques or considerations during the tiling process that can help mitigate the effects of critical lighting?
Absolutely. If that permanent lighting is in place, use it constantly.
Keep checking your work under that light.
Yeah. Continuously evaluate the appearance of your work as you go. It lets you catch any subtle lippage or inconsistencies early on when you can still maybe adjust. Stick rigidly to those recommended offset patterns, right? Remembering that maximum 33% offset for large format tiles. Coverings 2019, Tile of the World, Coverings Connected, all advise that.
No 50-50 on the big tiles.
Generally, no. And of course, ensure you're using proper trowel techniques. Get that full mortar coverage behind every tile.
Collapsing the ridges.
Fully collapsing the ridges. Any voids, remember, can create their own shadows that will just be exacerbated by that low-angle light. So, pay extra attention to achieving consistent, even tile placement.
Okay, so we've done our absolute best during installation, followed all the advice, but then, the owner comes back after the final lighting is fully installed and says, hey, this doesn't look right. What's our professional approach post-installation when critical lighting seems to reveal issues?
Okay, yeah, that happens. First and foremost, before anyone panics, perform a visual inspection yourself, but under what you'd consider normal viewing conditions.
Not with a flashlight grazing the wall.
Exactly. No spotlights, no flashlights trying to make it look worse. For walls, that's typically viewing from around 36 inches away. For floors, just standing height. Do this under standard ambient light. This gives you a baseline assessment of the overall install, like Coverings Connected and our notes recommend.
Establish a baseline first.
Right. Next, you need to actually verify whether the installation meets the allowable lippage standards. Check ANSI A108.02. Check the TCNA handbook. Architessa and our notes point this out. Is the lippage actually out of tolerance, or does it just look bad under the critical light?
Measure it against the standard.
Precisely. Document the lighting conditions thoroughly with photos. Show the same area under both the critical lighting and normal lighting. That visual record can be really informative, as Architessa suggests.
Show the difference the light makes.
Yeah. Then you might consider suggesting some simple non-structural fixes, maybe adding baffles or opaque covers to the existing light fixtures, or perhaps recommending a switch to a softer, more diffused light source. Coverings Connected proposes these kinds of ideas.
Simple modifications to the lighting itself.
Sometimes that's all it takes. Finally, if you've done your checks, you've measured, and you've determined that the lippage is indeed within acceptable industry tolerances.
But the client still isn't happy because of the shadows.
Then your focus shifts back to education. You explain the inherent effects of critical lighting, and again, suggest that relocating or adjusting the light source is likely the most effective solution, as mentioned in our notes.
So it's about verifying against standards, documenting, suggesting light fixes, and educating.
Exactly. It's a systematic professional way to handle those really tricky post-installation concerns. It reframes the issue, hopefully, from a perceived installation failure to an understanding of how light interacts with surfaces.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about managing the situation professionally. For more Tile and Stone fun, follow Craig on Instagram at TileNerdArmy.
Yeah, definitely a great resource. Lots of visual inspiration and good connections there with other pros in the industry.
So wrapping this up, it's clear that critical lighting, well, it can be a significant challenge, right? Often overlooked sometimes in tile and stone installs.
Definitely a hidden challenge sometimes.
But as we have explored in this deep dive, by really understanding its root, causes, the substrate, the tile, the light itself, and by proactively implementing strategies at every stage.
From design, pre-install, during install, post-install.
Right, all the way through. You, as a stone and tile professional, can effectively mitigate those negative effects.
Absolutely. And that consistent thread, we kept coming back to clear communication with everyone involved. Owners, architects, designers.
Yeah.
right from the outset. That is just absolutely crucial for setting expectations and preventing misunderstandings down the line.
Yeah, communication is key. Remember, our ultimate goal isn't just meeting the minimum industry standards, right? It's delivering a finished tile or stone installation that looks exceptional and performs beautifully under any lighting conditions.
That's the ideal, yeah.
And by paying close attention to substrate flatness, making informed decisions about tile selection, considering those grout joint sizes, employing your skilled installation techniques, being mindful of layout patterns, and maybe most importantly, having those proactive conversations about lighting placement.
You really empower yourself.
Yeah, you empower yourselves to consistently achieve that goal and ensure, hopefully, client satisfaction every time.
So maybe think about your next project. As you review the plans, are there any potential critical lighting scenarios that immediately jump out at you now?
Good question.
What specific steps will you take, armed with this knowledge, to address those proactively? How can you ensure your hard work shines in the best possible light, literally?
Tile the world and let's keep learning together. And for all your tile and stone needs, shop tilebar.com.